And we're live.
We're
Masculinity
live.
number 7. No, 6. 6. 6. And today's going to be a mishmash of cool things, everywhere from a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons to cigar smoking, pipe smoking, and talking about an essay that TJ just wrote for Masculine Geek. And we posted that yesterday.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Oh, I was thinking, do you want me to briefly go over that?
Yeah, you can. You can give it a rundown.
Okay, cool. So for those of you who have not read it, you can go to masculinegeek.com. It'll be the first essay or post that'll be up there. And it's titled Thoughts on a More Complete Beast by Jack Donovan. I read that book this weekend. It's not a very long read, so you can go buy it and read it in a couple hours if you're a fast reader. But I really want to touch on, it's a great book. For a short book, it's got a lot of wisdom in it. And one of the things, though, that was really profound that I had never really thought of before was this idea about hate. And we have this tendency to, when people hate us, we want to understand why. We do self-reflection, self-introspection. We ask, why do they hate us? As if there's something wrong with us that needs to be changed. Well, the reality is that what might be hate is really someone honoring you. It's a form of honor. Now, whether you deserve to be hated or not is kind of a separate issue. But the point is that you hate something or someone who is superior to you in some sense. So you, as Donovan's point out in the book, you pity people who are, or things that are weaker than you, right? And the analogy I give in my essay is that Bilbo in The Hobbit doesn't kill Gollum because he pities him, because he's a pathetic creature. He's a weak creature. Whereas nobody pities Sauron. Both creatures both beings want the ring and all that other stuff, but one of them is strong and is a threat. So people hate something that's threatening to them. They pity something that is not threatening to them, but you may have reasons to dislike it. So it's really helpful for men who are doing things, they're going their own way, they're doing what they want, and they get hate for it. What they need to understand is that it is almost in some sense a mark of honor, because somebody thinks that you are worthy of their attention enough to, as opposed to just indifference or not caring, because hate is an active emotion as opposed to indifference, which is passive. It's just, you don't even think about it. You're apathetic. You don't care. You can't not care about something and hate it at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it really helps men, particularly within the context of being a masculine geek. You're going to get hate from potentially two different groups. You can get hate from men who are masculine but avoid stuff that's considered geek culture out of fear of being seen as less masculine, and they don't like the fact that you're able to somehow bridge those two successfully and effectively. The other people that you might get hate from are people who are geeks but not masculine, because they'll resent you for you being able to do what they can't do. I think that we've discussed this before. People will get into certain types of subcultures as a way to retreat from the challenge of being masculine, because it's something that you have to proactively seek out for its own sake now. It's not like thousands of years ago where you had to be strong, brave, and good at something in order to just survive. Now it's an option. You can be weak. You can be a soy boy. Like, that's the default setting now.
That's a good outline. Something you said about a masculine man being, I'm not exact words, being afraid of sharing or expressing a geek side. Now, would you argue that a masculine man really wouldn't care?
No, or would a masculine man? I don't think it's mutually exclusive. A masculine man can care because he's afraid of it's a weakness. Now he'll care if he would want to do that kind of stuff, but doesn't because he's out of fear. Because and of course fear is not bravery, right? So that's where it gets a little complicated, because if someone's outwardly, or maybe we got to remember that it's not either or. There's people who are very strong physically, they're not strong emotionally. They're not strong psychologically. They're not strong spiritually. Or they could be men who are strong in all those areas. They're just not physically strong. It's the same thing with courage. You can be brave in a lot of areas of life. You know, like I'm trying to think of an example of this. It would be Dick Winters, Richard Winters from Band of Brothers, a TV show or series that I constantly cite because it's so great. But that guy was very brave. But when they asked him, the paratroopers, his guys in his company would ask him if he was going to go on a date that weekend, he'd like blush and get really, really shy. So I think maybe he wasn't nearly as brave with the women, whereas Bill Garnier was just brave all around. He was fearless with women. He was fearless with in combat as well. So I think that there are men who are masculine in the sense that they're brave in a lot of areas, but they're not brave enough to do something that they enjoy doing if they feel like it's a threat.
So because there are levels.
Right. It's levels, and I think it's also a form of almost resentment that someone else is able to balance those two in a way that they either can't or are afraid of trying. And so, yeah, as far as does that make a man unmasculine? No, I would say he's less masculine in that sense, because a truly masculine man just wouldn't care.
Well, that's essentially what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that is to give a really long-winded and complicated answer. Yeah, I would say a truly masculine man, or I can't believe I'm even using this term or this phrase or this expression, but a man who's truly secure in his masculinity will not care if another man plays Dungeons and Dragons or is into tabletop games or card games or whatever it is. He does something, or he's really into comic books, or he's really into certain types of video games. A truly masculine man's not going to care because he's going to be focused on whether or not that man in question is, as long as he's masculine in other areas, he doesn't care. But at the same time, it's just important to note that expect it. What it could be is actually a telltale sign of how truly masculine a man who seems masculine is, where he's got it out for men who do certain types of activities there's nothing wrong with them. They're considered geek culture or geekish things to do. That, as we've talked before, men 100 years ago would have been doing. A lot of men, great men and masculine men, were into. They wrote poetry. They were into Shakespeare, or whatever it is that would be considered kind of a dorkish thing to do now. And I think that that's also where a man's allowing his masculinity to be defined by the culture and society rather than by an actual concrete and objective definition.
Gotcha. Something that's essentially universal and crosses.
Right.
It crosses all boundaries.
Right. And the question is why, if someone doesn't like an activity or a hobby or whatever, the question is, why don't you like it? Or why do you think it's weird that he's really into that? You got to provide a better answer than, well, that's for geeks, or that's for nerds, or that's for whoever.
Yeah.
That's only for those people. And as a masculine man, we can't have anything to do with it.
What do you think, Rob?
Well, to sum it up for the viewer, the listener, I would say if you find yourself worrying about what another man thinks, you've got more work to do. And if you are a guy who's looking at another man and you're judging him, you care that he's into tabletop or whatever, then you as well have more work to do.
Absolutely.
That if you really are masculine, like you guys have already said, you're not going to give a fuck. You know, it's going to be, to each his own. It may not be my thing, but I don't care.
Right.
So
I think that's a really good point, is men who get hung up on stupid stuff like that. They get really, they can't let it go, and they get hung up. I don't know if I just consider it to be very unmasculine for men to get hung up on trivial things like that.
Who else thinks that too? Women.
Right.
They do. I've seen guys that get hung up on shit and their wives or girlfriends are looking at them and start rolling their eyes, or they're looking, like, really? And it's like, yeah.
Right. Well, that's a separate topic, but I would say not getting hung up on stuff and the little details is, or at least with other men, the less drama, or you knowing how to focus on the big things, right? Yep. Does a buddy of yours show up on time or do what he says he's going to do? Is he somebody who stands by you when you're going through a hard time? Is he somebody who you can trust with secrets and have confidence with? Is he a guy that you know isn't going to ruin the friendship over or choose some crazy that he's dating over you? Because when it comes down to, if she forces him to choose between you or her, he's going to go with you. That all matters. Whether he's into, I'm trying to think of something that what's hard for me is I can't think of something that would actually bother me if a friend of mine was really into, because I've got friends who are into all different sorts of stuff. We're talking about normal stuff, not like creepy stuff where you're thinking, or it makes you wonder, is this actually the guy I know? That kind of thing.
Okay.
I guess, has that ever happened to any of you, where you had friends or just new people and they almost looked down on you or thought you were less of a man because of something you were doing, or that it was just...
I did, but in all honesty, I was probably 14 when it happened. That I had a so-called friend that shit on some of the things I liked when I was learning how to play guitar, and at 14 I sucked, and he shit all over it. And yet I was like, do you play? No. So if you were better than me and you thought I sucked, well, maybe there's some merit. Obviously I need to practice more, but you don't even play, so what the fuck do you care? And right. I showed him the door, because he came over to my house and shit on what I was doing in my house.
It probably bothered him that you were doing it and he was not.
Exactly.
And you run into that a lot. It's this crab in a bucket. Friends, family members, it doesn't matter. It comes down to, how dare you lift yourself up out of what I think you are. I've pigeonholed you, and you have to remain in this because that's who you are. You can't change. You can't change yourself. This is who you are. This is who I say you are. And if you do, then you're inauthentic. You're playing a part, and you're a fake.
You're trying too hard.
You're trying too hard. Yeah. You know what? I don't even pay attention to that shit anymore. It's 13th grade bullshit.
Yep.
Right. But I think because people don't, I think that this ties in with masculinity, because when boys become adults, but they really don't ever feel like they're truly men, they become, I think, hypersensitive to anything that might be perceived as making them unmasculine or making them unpopular, because they're how really what it fundamentally comes down to is, how do I prove myself to people whose opinions I care about? And in the past, as I wrote in the essay, men had all these different opportunities 1,000 years ago, or 500 years ago, or even so much as 200 years ago, or just 60 years ago in a war or whatever. There was all these different opportunities for men to prove that they were masculine, but also prove themselves and earn the respect and esteem and admiration of other men. Now, if you're doing a sport, maybe, but then you go out into the world, and does anybody? There's no transition from, oh, you've completed this journey, you are now a man.
Yeah, the rite of passage is no longer there.
Right, the rite of passage.
Boy Scouts used to have that, and it's non-existent anymore.
Yep. Yeah, well, as an Eagle Scout, I went through that, and unfortunately, I think at the time we were seeing the transition from it being an accomplishment for the sake of the honor to it's something that you need to do so that you can put it down on a resume and get a good paying job so that you
Remember
can
we were talking about
be a good beta provider, right? And all that other stuff. Whereas, and I think it destroyed the value of it in a sense, because then scouts were not looking at it as what it would provide you, regardless of what a job would think or something like that. But the other thing is that you're not treated differently afterwards, right? Do people suddenly say, oh, he's an Eagle Scout, that means I'm going to assume he knows all these skills and he has all this knowledge? It doesn't earn, being an Eagle Scout doesn't, at this point, doesn't mean anything.
Well, it doesn't carry any weight.
No,
doesn't carry,
exactly.
Doesn't carry any weight. And imagine, and what's funny is people are talking about how with Boy Scouts, that was considered to be for the, ironically enough, for kind of the geeky, nerdy kids, like, the stereotypical Boy Scout. Kind of like if you guys watched that movie Up, that Pixar film where it's got the chubby, it's got this chubby little, he belongs to some sort of quasi Boy Scout thing, but he's just really, he's really obnoxious and he's just full of energy, but whatever. But he's trying to prove himself to this older guy who's been he's a widower, but that's how Boy Scouts were seen. As Boy Scouts was not for the cool, it was almost like not for the cool kids at one point, or not. I'm not saying that was the case. I'm saying that was a lot of the perception for people who weren't in Boy Scouts. But of course, we guys in my troop and my patrol and my buddies who were in Boy Scouts, we kind of laughed. It's like, we get to go on the weekends and burn stuff. What do you get to do? Right. And it's perfectly legal and it's actually encouraged. So, we go on a trip and cause trouble in the wilderness. So
set up tents and make fires and
right. When did that learning these skills and actually carrying? I'm curious about when that was considered nerdy or geekish or dweeby or like a low social status to learn. It's almost like sincerity. And maybe I'm getting on the point of the issue here, is that people who are being sincere about something that they like, right? They want to learn good skills, or they want to, or they're genuinely interested in something, and they're pursuing it. It's a form of sincerity and authenticity that a lot of other people, how many of them are doing stuff that they don't actually want to do and avoiding things they want to do that they actually want to do because they're afraid of what other people might think of them?
Yeah, well, talking about Boy Scouts carrying weight, there's also the weight of responsibility.
Right.
You were held accountable. You had goals. It was fun. Camping was fun, and archery and shooting and everything. But you had to earn merit. You earned. That was the thing. You earned a badge.
Right.
There were things that you had to do to get ahead, and that was something that was esteemed. And that's a good question. I don't know when that fell out. That esteem and that honor and that willingness and that wanting to earn just dropped away.
I have a theory.
All right.
Well, I think it happened probably about the same time feminism really started to go on the rise. When you go back to the 60s, and not only was it feminism itself, but you had the new age guy, the guy that's in touch with his feelings. He cares about what women think, all of that kind of stuff. And the just be yourself and, hey man, we're just here grooving kind of thing. I think that's maybe when this really started, is we don't want that macho football player, military type of guy. We want this new age, willowy hippie kind of guy.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of where it started. I know during the 70s when disco took off, you had the macho guys with the shirt open mid-chest, the
hair showing.
The hair showing. They were showing masculinity.
Yeah.
But yet they were made fun of. They were mocked. They became caricatures. Because, well, nobody wants to do that anymore. We want to look like girls. Grow your hair out. Do that kind of thing. And so these guys were mocked, and instead of other people's society at large looking at him as, hey, he's masculine and he's sexy. It's, oh, he's a joke. He's a clown. So
right. I'm trying to think of, and I think that that's true. I think that really after starting in the 60s that we started to see that kind of thing. But I'm really curious about how, and I almost wonder if at the same time we also started to get into the whole egalitarian thing, as I've said before. And the reason is because I read about, I don't know how much you guys have read about Fred Reed. He's that former reporter who's, I think now he's in Mexico. He's a retired Marine. He fought in Vietnam and all that stuff. But he was writing about what it was like growing up, going to college back in the day. And he said one of their past, I mean, and this is a guy who's lived like, he's a man's man, masculine man, right? But when they were at university, one of their pastimes at that college was to open up a dictionary, find a word, and they would have, the challenge would be for someone to spell the word and be able to give the definition and then be able to describe the origin of the word. And so, I mean, this is what men did at university 50, 60, however many years ago he was in, I'm assuming it was before Vietnam. I'm not quite sure. But if men were doing that today at college, they would be called dorks, dweebs, nerds. Only nerds do this kind of stuff. Whereas this was the exercises, intellectual exercises of men like Teddy Roosevelt, who, you know, do you want to get into a boxing ring with that guy? Do you want to go jump and do a swimming match with him in the Potomac? So men who are masculine. When did that stuff become something that only pasty white dweebs who live in the basement and read comic books? When did that become? An example of that is when I was reading some of the books that I've read in front of other people, and they considered it to be very nerdy for someone to be doing, or they thought it was just not very masculine, like reading Shakespeare or studying the history, like military history or something like that. And I just thought, when did this stuff become, when did they segregate masculinity? Of course, they're trying to redefine it now, and they're constantly trying to redefine it, but it's almost like you can't be a physically strong, masculine man and be interested in these topics. And I'm trying to I think part of it is egalitarianism of somebody who's doing that is just demonstrating their superiority, right? If you're intellectual superiority, right? If you're studying all this stuff and you know all this stuff, it makes people feel insecure because it makes them ask themselves, what exactly do I know? And what exactly did I learn in college? And what was my educational waste? And then they start having this existential crisis.
I think you're giving the average normie way too much credit. Honestly, from my take, it's, when did it start? I don't know. I think you could tie it back possibly to, when did public education decline? It was bad when I was a kid, but it's all I knew.
That's
but I see it today,
probably around the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I see it today, and it's even worse now than when I was a kid. And so, yeah, people, I think as a collective whole, our societal IQ has dropped.
Yes.
And so it's easier to make fun of something you can't even comprehend. And they know it on a gut level. It's, I don't think the average normie is smart enough to be able to say, well, it's, you know, God, this guy's smart and I got a worthless degree. And so, Jesus, what did I do with my life? And have this existential crisis that you're talking about, TJ. So I'm saying you're giving him way too much credit.
I think I figured it out, and it dovetails off of what you just said. Back in the day, and I know it's a cliche thing to say, but if you study what education, what the schools used to teach, this was stuff that everybody learned and was expected to learn, and people were shamed for. But then when you have a combination of feminism, and then you have egalitarianism, and you have the lowering of standards, it became stuff that only those who were proactively interested in intellectual improvement pursued. You know, they pursued excellence, and to do that was a loss of social status. And so it was for people who already didn't have social status to begin with. And so that's why you have a lot of these guys who just assume now, and it's considered just normal, that if you want to be really, really smart, you need to give up social status, and you also shouldn't focus too much on grooming. You shouldn't focus too much on your fashion sense. You shouldn't focus too much on your social skills, right? You can't be this really, really, really intelligent man who knows tons of stuff about a topic, and then also be able to carry on an engaging conversation with a girl. Like you're not supposed to be able to do that, because that man is superior to the man who can only do one or two of those things, right? And so I think it goes back to, it makes people, we're trying to, it's the lowering of standards, whereas everybody used to know all this stuff, or at least learn it in schools, and now they don't. And so you have to be willing to give up social status, because the herd doesn't want that, and they look down on people. I don't know what it is. I think it's in is it Danish culture or Scandinavian culture, where they look down on people who try to improve themselves in a way that indicates they're better than other people. Like no one's allowed to think of themselves as better. I know that there's a similar cultural value in African countries as well, where if you're trying to improve yourself, you're inferring or telling everyone that you think you're better than them. That's how they interpret. Whereas in our culture,
that's happening here.
Right. In traditional American culture, it was the opposite. It was, we want to be everybody, the kind of like what Patton was saying in the film, right? Americans love a winner. We always admire the best boxing champion, the fastest runner, the big league ball player, and all that other stuff. And we hate losers. So that's completely changed. The losers are now the guys who actually try to improve their lives.
Well, it goes back to the victim culture, where if you're a victim, then you're brave, then hooray, and you get money thrown at you, and you get a pat on the back, and you get to suck on the government tit.
Where we've seen the decline of education, IQ, all of that. What we've seen the rise of is the victimhood mentality and the crab in the bucket on steroids.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, think about if you're really good at a geekish, you're a genuine, non-masculine geek. You're really good at a game, and you're able to take pride in that. And you're saying, yeah, I'm overweight. I can't get girls. I don't have any social skills. People think I'm weird. I'm socially at the bottom. But you know what? At least I can escape from that playing this game. Well, imagine you're doing like a public game session or whatever, and some guy shows up who's in good shape. He's got good social skills. He's able to carry on good conversations with people. He's got good etiquette, and he's got all that stuff. It's a reminder of, you could be better, but you're choosing not to be. And so that's where you can get hate from non-masculine geeks. But I'm also, there's a third group, and that's just larger society that just doesn't like men who, let's say, can go in the weight room and bench press 300 pounds when they only weigh 185. And they've memorized Shakespeare, and they know how to play. They love playing Settlers of Catan. Like they're just fanatical about that. They don't really understand that kind of person.
Well, it's the crab in the bucket thing again. We don't want anyone that can possibly do anything even remotely better than ourselves, which we don't want to do shit. We just want to collect the government check and be applauded for just existing.
Right. The mediocrity.
That's like everyone gets a trophy mentality.
Right.
It's on a grand, ridiculous scale.
Right.
Well, that's kind of what I was, or not kind of, that is what I was talking about in the essay that I wrote, is that masculinity today is an option. And so the default setting, the default position, if you are a go along, get along type of guy, you're not going to be in shape. You're not going to be motivated. You're not going to be driven, and you're going to be mediocre. Like mediocrity. Oh, and I know that's a relative term, but what passes for mediocrity today is just not good enough. Right.
Well, I mean,
Whereas, let's imagine you were a Roman, like think of a mediocre Roman centurion in Julius Caesar's legions fighting at the Battle of Alesia in Gaul. That guy had the skills of a construction worker and the skills of a Marine.
And a farmer.
Even being mediocre.
Yeah. So being mediocre in the Roman army was still a source of pride. It's like, yeah, we went and conquered we built a 17-mile long wall on both sides in our front and back. And that's what passes for mediocrity. So what passes for mediocrity today doesn't provide any pride or sense of status in any way. Or imagine being a Spartan soldier during, going through the Agoge. I mean, the mediocre guy to go through that training was superior to what would pass for mediocrity in the U.S. Army today.
Well, it's as you were saying in the essay, and it brings it back to what Jack Donovan was talking about. It's masculinity is like essentially, and he's correct, not needed.
It's not necessary.
Necessary. It's
right.
Yeah. I back it. It's needed. It's not necessary, and it's not necessary because we have all this technology. Everything is very soft, and Theodore Roosevelt was talking about that. The very soft, effeminate society, which he stressed the strenuous life for boys and men. So, I mean, with that, a lot of people just fall into okay, well, what I'm doing is good enough. It's not necessary for me to do this. I can just be myself and everything is fine. Someone will take care of me. Their government will take care of me. Family and friends, which to some extent, I mean, that's
it's true.
That's true.
Yeah.
But to rely on that, and what brings it back to what you guys and TJ was talking about before about it being there's a gut level instinct about being a man and his masculinity that doesn't go away. And this tepid, warm, mediocre society that we live in is well, and it's not like they're live and let live like you would have, say, in the 70s, where I'm not trying to romanticize. I think the 70s was an awful decade. Nothing good came of it. The clothing was horrible.
Other than Patton, the film and the book, like nothing else. And maybe a James
George
Bond
C.
film.
Scott, yes, George C. Scott was came out of the 70s. Yeah.
But I guess with the 70s, I think then there was this live and let live because there was almost this equilibrium between two different groups where neither one had the power completely. There was still that struggle. And now that shift has gone over from anything you do differently is threatening or dangerous. Not that we need to get into it because it's not necessarily germane to what we're talking about, but there is that Esquire magazine article that just came out.
I only know about that peripherally. Yeah, and so someone said that article was dangerous, and it's a story just about a regular kid in Wisconsin. But your mere existence is dangerous or threatening to someone, as opposed to 40 years ago, it was, if the hippie wanted to go grow his hair out down to his knees and smoke weed and never and didn't want to learn anything and wasn't very intellectually interested in pursuing stuff, he wasn't going to resent someone who was still pursuing excellence in his life, right? He was getting an education, he was getting a good paying job. You know what the other thing is? I think what also caused these things to be relegated to the geek culture is that the loss of respect and social status for men who pursue those things. Because let's say you, like 100 years ago, if you were a very educated, well pedigreed man, there was a lot of respect that came with that. There was still, I've got all deceased, but relatives, ancestors or whoever, who came from very prestigious backgrounds in terms of what they had accomplished in life. And that garnered a lot of respect societally. People, it was, even when I was growing up, it was uncouth for you to refer to an adult by their first name. But I think even then there was this respect and reverence, I would say, for men who were accomplished intellectually. If they were really smart, people would
would look at that as something to aspire to. I think what's happened is it's now the butt of a joke. Like it's being that guy requires you to give up social status.
Yeah. It also comes down to something Rob was saying in one of his last podcasts about manners.
Right.
It's like almost completely non-existent.
Yep.
Right. I mean, I remember growing up with my parents giving me these books on etiquette and all these different rules. But what I've noticed over the years is that stuff, now, not saying that you shouldn't be well-mannered, but I mean, there was very, very specific. George Washington even wrote his own manners book. He spent a lot of, we'll talk about George Washington for a little bit. He wrote, copied down rules for manners and etiquette in a book that I actually have that was given to me as a gift. But he also spent a significant period of his life working on his manners and etiquette, because how you behaved in society in Virginian society in the 1700s was affected your status. If you acted like an uncultured, uncouth, ill-bred buffoon, you lost social status regardless of whether you were from a good background or not. In fact, it was seen as even worse because you were not living up to the esteem of your family. And so that's why they spent a lot of time learning, when you go into a room, and even in the 30s, I have a book on the 1930s by a professor named David Gelernter, and he was discussing all these different little rules and social norms back then that you were expected to adhere to if you wanted to maintain social status. And so that really leads to the next question of what has changed or if you want to earn the respect and admiration of our society, what do you do? Back then, you would do all this kind of amazing stuff. And I'm not saying that I'm never advocating or arguing that the society back then didn't have its problems, but let's compare who we admired back then compared to now. And learning how to write was considered important for everybody. Now it's almost as though not knowing how to do stuff is what you have to do to maintain social status. That becoming proficient in something, people kind of give you grief about, where you're considered really nerdy.
Well, then it comes back to actually expending energy and work, because not doing anything, you're still given the trophy. You're still patted on the back.
Right.
So doing this extra stuff is just more work for you. I want to bring this back to the tepid, warm. Let's say we'll stay with masculinity, or what passes for it these days. I was listening to Reverend Jesse Peterson, Jesse Lee Peterson, and he had on a Facebook personality. He was around 32 years old, and it was some minor notoriety. But he used to be a feminist. No, he's not. But he had this very, 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 very feminine way of talking. Not that there's anything wrong with that per se, but he was very timid. He wasn't confident, and he couldn't work because of his anxiety. And when pressed for what he was talking about, is it could be anything. And when asked further, he said something very interesting. He said, when people what people say don't align with what I believe, that made him anxious. The point where this fucker couldn't work. Now, is this the bar now? Is this where the bar is set? This bullshit?
Yeah.
Well, I don't. This is where I have a really hard time trying to understand the psychological fragility, other than the fact that when people talk about male fragility or whatever fragility, they're just projecting. Because when I meet people who actually agree with me on anything that's substantial outside of, say, like a religious setting, or like where it's explicitly a place for people who think like I do. When I just meet random people, I get this weird feeling because it's such an unusual experience. I grew up in an area where, in the Seattle area, where just your views are always going to be different. Or at least for me, I've been a political minority my entire life growing up. So I surrounded and where people could openly speak about views that were opposed to me, or they could speak critically of stuff that they may not know, but they would speak critically of stuff that I believed in or cared about. And they would do so oftentimes in very ignorant ways. But I just got used to the fact that there were other people who thought differently than me. So the idea that these people would find it shocking or just earth-shattering that there's someone who doesn't view the world the same as them,
to the point that it's actually physically debilitating.
It's because what happens is they think imagine if you're just taught something. I mean, it's a kind of when you've been taught something your entire life is true, but never why, and then someone challenges it, you have a breakdown because you don't know why you believe it. You're suddenly having a crisis of identity. Yeah, and so I think that's the same thing with a lot of stuff where we've just decided that these pursuits or hobbies are a lot. For a man to pursue them is a loss of status. Now there are some that I would say yes, it's a loss of status for a man. If you're a brony, yeah, or if you've got one of those anime pillows, or you've got one of those dolls, it's like, yeah, okay.
What is that about your anime pillow? What did you wind up naming her?
LaFonda, right?
LaFonda.
Nice. Well, okay, so speaking of Geek, Napoleon Dynamite. That's a great movie. Great movie about a geek, but like what makes him a geek is like the stuff where at the very beginning, because you could tell watching this film, I was watching it with guys who I would consider to be pretty geekish. When he took the plastic soldier, tied to a string, tossed it out, everybody was just howling, and they're like, "Dude,
toss it out the back of the ass."
Well, yeah, they all wanted to like push for some toy store to make a product or sell that product. Like they thought it was so cool. And I've still tried to figure out to this day what made that so. Why can't you do it? Well, one, why don't you just take an action figure yourself that you have, tie a string around it, and toss it out your door? Like, why would you do that? But why is that something that would appeal to? Why do certain things? I guess what makes something geekish or not? And I think that there's an objective sense that it's considered geekish. And I almost wonder, is it just what causes a loss of perceived status, social status? Because let's say that you came into a room full of men 100 years ago who were, I'm trying to think of just stuff that was considered masculine back then that isn't anymore. And I'm trying to think of some examples, maybe just like music, right? If it was considered acceptable for masculine men to listen to certain types of music back in the day, if you're caught listening to that music now, as I have been, it's like 1920s jazz, or I listen to this radio station called Radio Dismute that plays very rare collection of vinyl record from the Roaring 20s and even in the teens, but that's considered to be a nerdy thing to do. But back then it wasn't. So why is interest in certain things that are old, why is that considered geekish?
I think you answered the question yourself.
Yeah.
We are a disposable society. Oh, by the way, everything you guys have talked about right up till now is discrimination. Okay? You're discriminating against the dipshits of the world. Because you're pointing out the bullshit.
That's the title of this podcast.
And so while I'm saying this, there's some truth to it. When you think of corporate culture and, we don't want to offend nobody. And when Johnny is a fuck up on the job, back in the day, the boss could take him aside or do it in front of the others and rip his ass. Okay. Well, no, can't do that anymore. So now we rip everyone's ass. Okay. Because we can't discriminate, because Johnny then could sue because I hurt his feelings. Okay.
You know where else I'm seeing that is, what's a way that people make fun of nerds or geeks or whatever? It's when not when they're being socially awkward or when they don't know like social cues, but when they speak proper English. Like speaking proper English now. That's one thing that makes me nerdy or geekish, is I'm really working hard on eliminating bad stuff from not like crass language or swearing, even though I'm trying to work on that as well, but where I'm trying to eliminate phrases or expressions that is just gutter, like the word like, such as the word like. We use it way too much in our ordinary conversations. And I think that is the making our discourse and our conversations effeminate, because we're making our what we're saying, we're taking the edge off, we're blunting it, as opposed to simply speaking and not using unnecessary words.
Oh, it smacks of lack of confidence as well.
Right. But what I found in my own life, and the other thing, the reason I'm working on that, and I've had to, is because what I found when I was younger is that people, and they use these words, that it was threatening and way too aggressive for when I was a cub reporter, when I was just in my 20s or I was in high school. Yeah, I would just go up to people and I would ask them very direct questions, and I would get right to the point. And I got in trouble for that. People were saying, well, you're way too direct. You need to sort of smooth it out or whatever. And
you've already answered your own question.
Right.
Well, you have. Listen, just for a second here. Okay. We can sum this up real easy. Why is this going on? Why is certain things geekish, but 40, 50, 60, 70, 100 years ago it wasn't? Because we live in a feminine culture now. And in a feminine culture, we don't offend anyone. We don't discriminate against anyone. We include anyone. You're allowed to show up and just be you.
Yeah.
And so, and what do women do? Men fight physically, women fight psychologically.
Right.
Women are concerned about social status. Okay. And so if you want to look at something and why is that now geekish compared to 100 years ago? Well, it's because 100 years ago, the typical average masculine man did not care about social status. Not really. Where today, everything is tied to social status.
That is
and
true.
What is the fastest way to tear someone down? Oh, they don't have social status. It is, they don't understand social cues. And
they're weird. They're awkward. Being awkward is the worst crime in our society today.
Right.
Making someone feel awkward is considered a crime.
Right.
A social crime.
Right.
And so here,
and it's because of our feminine society that we live in.
Right.
Into a crime.
Right.
And so that's it.
Well, also, here's the other question. Who, and I'm not saying that there's a cabal. It's not a specter group.
It's not.
There's not number two, but and Ernst Stavro Blofeld type guy. But what you have is who is deciding who is considered, like, who is dictating the hierarchy? Because
women.
Right. And so I was just watching that film Gods and Generals about, the film is primarily about Stonewall Jackson. This is a guy who, anybody who's read about him would understand. The man was very eccentric. He had a lot of weird and peculiar habits. He would hold one of his hands above his head for psychic balance. He sucked on lemons all the time. He was not fanatically, that's probably not the right word, but he was a fervently religious, I believe Presbyterian. Like religion was, and it was funny. There's that film, you've seen the film Gettysburg, where Longstreet is talking to the British guy and trying to explain Southern culture and all that stuff. And he says, right. Yeah. And he says, are women like their men religious and a little mad? That's, I think, why they fall in love with preachers. And I thought that was such a, what word would I say to describe it? It was so strange to hear nowadays, because those are not words that you would use to describe the type of men that women are interested in today. But I think it's because then, again, a different group of people were determining social status, whereas, and I think you're right, men didn't care about social status. They didn't care about necessarily their standing in society, not
to the degree they do today.
And it was about, and if you were having social status back then, it was what
men that they cared about.
Right. They were concerned about their social status among men, and also that was rooted in your accomplishments. And so that's why a lot of these just what they did was very different. They weren't concerned about being nice. I mean, that's a relatively new phenomenon as far as that kind of stuff, that being nice is something that you need to do to maintain social standing, even though I think if you look at men who are successful in the business world, they're anything but nice, because you have to be a little ruthless.
They're usually psychopaths.
Mm-hmm.
Your big CEO types, they're psychopaths. They don't have a conscience, and it's I do what is necessary to get what I want.
Right.
And that's why they're the CEO.
Right. But I was thinking of just men were not necessarily concerned about social status as much. And I think it was in a different context of what they were looking for is something that would earn them respect among the men. And so, but I've also been reading a lot about the wild men, or the adventurers and the explorers. You had Jebediah Smith, or Kit Carson and guys like that, where they were out in the wild and all this other stuff. But you had to be sort of eccentric to do that kind of stuff. And so they weren't as concerned about that. But I think and you know what else would be fascinating? We can discuss this maybe on another podcast when we've done the research. When did the word geek come into being? And who invented it? And what was the definition at the time? Because what the origin of a word will help tell us a lot about what the person had in mind on that kind of stuff. You know what's funny though is I was watching a film with Abbott Costello called "Follow That Ghost" or "Hold That Ghost" or something like that. Yeah. And if you noticed in the film, there's the professor who's a very geeky, nerdy guy with the stereotypical glasses, but he is completely unintentionally gaming this girl that is at the soda stand with him, because he's sitting there lecturing the soda jerk about orange juice and how you need to have it freshly squeezed and it loses all of its minerals or vitamins within minutes. And then he points at the cute girl and just starts critiquing her complexion and all this other stuff. It's like, yeah, she needs to drink more orange juice and eat less eggs and all this other stuff. And then she's clearly hitting on him throughout the film, and it's just blowing all over his head because he's too busy doing his scientific experiments or whatever. But I just thought, even back in I have no idea how common it was back then, but I think even then you could be kind of a nerd or a geek. But
that word was referenced back in 47. You're talking about Wild Men with William Lindsay Graham's novel Nightmare Alley, made into a film in 1947 starring Tyrone Power. But apparently Geek, which is a spinoff of Sideshow Freak, 1916 U.S. carnival and circus slang, perhaps a variant of geck, a fool, a dupe, simpleton. Drawing from Dutch Geck or Low German Geck, from an imitative verb found in North Sea Germanic and Scandinavian, meaning to croak, cackle, and also to mock, cheat. By 1983, used in teenager slang in reference to peers who lacked social graces but were obsessed with new technology and computers, such as the Anthony Michael Hall character in 1984's 16 Candles.
Interesting.
So it's about 100 years old. And it wasn't very laudable.
Right. So someone who's interested in new technology, but is to the point where they understand machines. But I actually think that is a working definition of a geek. A non-masculine geek is a man who understands machines but not humans.
Yeah, that's where I was thinking too. Yeah, good call.
Because I know some people in my life who are the engineer types, the architect. There are people who are very good with understanding machines. They're very good at car repairs. They're very good at computers and all that other stuff. But they do not understand people at all.
Well,
they don't.
Back to them not really, they really emotionally cannot, or they don't care about, once again, what Rob hit on, the social standing. Do they not give a shit about that to the point where they're okay?
No,
they realize that they're not good with people and they don't care. Or
a telltale sign of that is almost their inability to explain a very basic concept to another person. So as part of my job as a reporter, I have to explain very complicated things in a simplified manner to somebody. And what's funny is I was talking to a guy who's really into radios, and I was explaining to him, for those of you who are listening, I have a 1949 Philco radio behind me, and it wasn't working. And so I sent him a description of what was going on with the radio based on the schematics that I got offline. I had no idea what I was talking about, but I was just describing what the thing said. And he asked me how many years I'd been interested, doing radio stuff. And I said, I literally just bought this thing. And he was kind of amazed at how competent I sounded in writing about it. But I go, no, I'm just good at explaining stuff, even if I don't understand it. There's like the whole the basic gist of what's the skill to have. Right. And so if somebody would have asked me with something like that, but a traditional geek cannot explain, say, like the idea of percentages, could not explain that to it without using very, very technical. Like they can't, I keep using the word like, my apologies.
Stop that.
They cannot explain something using simpler words, which is what Orwell was all about, was if you can use a simpler word to describe it, their inability to determine what information is relevant to the person they're speaking to or not, right? Because if they're still using technical jargon that would blow over a person's head and they're not going to understand what's going on, it's because they have difficulty understanding something beyond themselves in that sense. Like I keep using the word like, they have a lack, they lack the capacity to imagine what it is to not know about something. So they can't explain it to someone who doesn't know what they're talking about on a topic. Whereas I can give a generalized idea of what something is, even if I don't really understand it. And I've had to explain that a few times when in some of my articles, people would ask me more technical questions, and I would say, I really don't know. I just know I know what this proposal does. I know what's going on, like the totality of it is this is going to cost money. It's going to cost this much money. It's as though a person who makes sausage can't explain what's in the sausage or how it's made or something like that. I'm wondering if that's a telltale sign of a traditional geek, whereas a masculine geek, I think that might be a good distinction to discuss. Since a geek traditionally is somebody who's interested in technology, I guess when did that then suddenly involve card games and Dungeons and Dragons and playing certain video games or being interested in, say, old books or collecting stamps?
I think that probably still fell under the auspices of the socially awkward as these things sort of took root. That's a good question. I mean, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Is that a feline in your lap there, sir?
Yes.
Who's that?
I'll have to bring Reese on sometime.
This is Normal.
The
Maine
Normal.
Coon.
A Maine Coon. Wow. Holy shit.
Yeah, he's a big cat.
I'd say Normal's a big one.
Yeah.
How long have you had Normal?
Let's see. Going on 12 years.
Wow. Okay.
Wow. Yeah, got him back in 07.
Okay.
I can't believe it's been 12 years since that. 2007 was 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Shit. Wow. Yeah. We'll talk about geek stuff since we're doing show and tell. That Rob's showing off his pussy. Okay.
Oh, speaking of geek, let me go grab my geek sign.
This is geek show and tell. So
right, 1 second.
I'll wait till you come back and then I'll go into mine. I'll give you a preview. You need to buy this. I don't get any kickback from this. There's no affiliate. This is just this is a Dungeons and Dragons Art and Arcana. It's a visual history of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, even if you don't like Dungeons and Dragons, it's worth it for the art and really the history. You've got some really fantastic. That's the cover of the Player's Handbook, Second Edition Player's Handbook.
Yep.
Yeah, there's an old advertisement from the 80s.
Nice.
The four is by Joe Manganiello, that dude. There he is.
Oh, that's the artist?
No, that's he's an actor.
Okay.
That's a masculine geek right there.
Yes, he
I
is.
know, he looks like a Robert
Looks
Downey
like a
Jr.'s brother.
But yeah, it's
See, and I was thinking Dave Rollins, Black
Oh.
Flag.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Kind of reminds me of him.
Yeah. So it's a history. It gives you the text, and then it follows along with the relevant art with Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. And when it started out was as war games, like the figurines, the warriors on the table. But yeah, this is fantastic. The maps and all the advertisements and the origin of the original computer games, whatnot. So yeah, pick this up. It's worth it. It's heavy as hell. Even if you don't get through it, I'm about a little more than halfway. It's a great doorstop. If an intruder comes in your house,
You can smash them.
Yeah, if you don't have your weapon loaded and you have this by your bedside, you just right across the face and they're down. So,
right.
But yeah, I pick this up. You'll like it.
So here is mine.
Oh shit! What's that?
Strange women line and pawns distributing swords, the basis for a system of government.
Wow.
Nice.
Paid for by Arthur Pendragon for king. And of course, people were saying, well, why does it say Arthur? It should say Uther. And it's like, no. Uther was his father.
Yeah.
Mr. Pendragon was my father. I'm trying to think if there's anything. Yeah. So, yeah, my buddy got me this for Christmas. So yeah, it's up on display along with the other.
You gonna get that framed?
No, it just came as this. Yeah, it's metal.
Oh, it's tin. It's like the ones we saw in Gettysburg.
Yeah. Ironically enough, it came out for the 2016 election. I was posting on social media my preferred candidate, which was a strange woman line and pawn distributed sword.
Nice.
Was Moisten Bink loved to shiver taunt me.
Now you were going to show the audience how to light one of your favorite geek accoutrements.
Oh, all right. Might as well do that, even though we're indoors. Whatever.
That's the reason why we're doing video today.
Right, exactly.
Never see ever again. It's just
right.
Get it while you can.
So this is the pipe that I got from Gettysburg when we were out there. Okay. So people can take a look. So if you note, it has. Oh, let me show right there. Yeah, and I got this for what was it, $20? Yeah, it was great. And what's cool about it is it opens up like this, as opposed to the more traditional or regular ones, the cheap ones where it just clicks. It's a little plastic thing. So this is just, it's more durable. It's going to last longer.
Gotcha.
And then this is stuff I also bought at Gettysburg, which was the, I think, Consummate Gentleman.
Gentleman, absolutely.
Which is a English style tobacco. So
you have to wear a monocle when you're doing that.
No, I feel like this is good if I need to get a smoking jacket to go with this. Like, I keep using the word like, I need to stop doing that. Sherlock Holmes in the ones with Robert Downey Jr. had a really cool smoking jacket that I'm hoping to get, because the one downside to smoking a pipe is that you got to get out of those clothes eventually at some point. So
you need a monocle too.
You definitely need a monocle, yeah.
Well, we'll see.
Get the monocle. We're gonna send you a monocle for fuck.
I'm wondering though, is that appropriate for the interior? Because it's kind of got that cabin feel to it. So I almost want to get another pipe that is more fitting, or a corncob pipe.
If that's the case, you need to grow the beard out more and wear lumberjack.
Right. Yep. I used to have a pretty big beard, and when I would smoke, there would be this smooth feeling on the beard. I'd be sitting there at some place after I'd smoked, and I would smoke outside, and then I'd go into, say, a brewery or a restaurant. I'd just be sitting there stroking the beard, people would say, "What's on your mind?" I go, "Nothing. I just feel really cool doing this."
Nice.
Okay, so what you want to do is you take, got to do the camera right. So you want to very gently have it. You don't want to push it. You don't want to pack it down. You want to just manually get as much
Hold it
as
up
you
higher.
can.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Sorry, I'm not used to being on camera for this stuff. And so you dip it in like this until you get about it's about full. Yeah, you want to get a lot in. And
what's there?
For the dipshits at home, this is like loading your bowl for your pot pipe. You want to stack that shit in.
Right. So as you can see, it's packed pretty well, but it's lightly. So what you want to do is you want to put your thumb and then just go like this. So that way it is down down below the top, because what you don't want to light it with stuff above, because then it'll either burn, fall off, or it'll start a flame that won't go away. So let me move this over here. And so you can use different types of lighting devices. Some people, the more traditionalists, like matches. Some people like lighters. There's others who have the little blowtorch. I'm not personally a big fan of those because it's really hard. Pushing it down or pointing it down doesn't really work. It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't create a flame. So
you're just gently drawing.
An important thing to know is that the first lighting is not the only lighting. You're going to do multiple lightings. It's not like Sherlock Holmes, the film with Robert Downey Jr., where he pulls his pipe out, lights it, and then immediately starts puffing away. That's not how it works. So an important thing to do also is to not, though you don't want to force when you're breathing. It's not like you're sucking it in, right? You want to do very gentle light puffs, or I'm trying to think of the not sensation, but when you're smoking, it's almost as though you're just breathing, but you're not inhaling. It's
right.
Kind of like Bill Clinton smoking weed. You don't inhale, right?
Right.
I assume it would be somewhat similar to a cigar.
Yes.
Right.
Nice. Get some good smoke there.
And one thing I would advise is to get good tobacco. If you get good quality tobacco, it'll do two things. One, it'll smell good. It will it won't leave a really bitter taste in your mouth or a strong. It'll be smooth. The other thing it'll also do is it will smell good on you afterwards. So I have a ritual where when I get to the top of a hike, like a mountain, hill, wherever I'm going, at the end of when I've reached the spot where I'm going to turn around, I smoke my pipe. And there's usually going to be people up on top of the mountain most of the time. And I have only gotten compliments. And that includes from women who you generally, not that I would choose one or the other based on their reaction, but they respond very differently to pipes than to cigarettes. I knew a girl in college, absolutely hated cigarettes. She was a big fitness type person, but she actually thought it was cool to see someone smoking a pipe.
Oh, a lot of women love cigar and pipe smoke.
So then after a while, so now that it's burned down a little bit, you just want to gently push it down a little bit more.
And a good base there. Nice.
That's what I loved about Lord of the Rings, is how they were always smoking.
Yep, always had the pipe out. I'm telling you, we got to get one of those. They do sell them, and they are working pipes. I would imagine the draw would be different with the long stem.
Yeah, and that's something else you'll learn with pipes, is that for start people who are starting out with pipes, I would advise them to start with a corn cob because they're cheap. They're, if it breaks, you know, whatever, it's made of corn cob. But they're also just, you can get really small ones that are like this big. And what's funny is I was reading about the Wildman Adventures, you know, like the Jedediah Smith and those types. They had a lot of prerequisites or things that they would bring with them, like something that every trapper would bring with them. And one of them would be a pipe. Most of them would bring a corncob pipe, but it was a very beloved item for them to have with them.
Mm. Nice.
What was that? Which Supreme Court justice was it that just started that?
Oh, I sent you that. I sent you that photo or that picture or something. It was the one that passed recently.
The one who was found dead with a pillow on his face.
I didn't hear about that, but shit. I guess
as one
of natural causes.
As one buddy joked to me, he's not the first Italian to be found dead with a pillow on his face.
Yeah, I'd like to know where the investigation on that one went. So Rob, you have some instruction and some good stuff too.
Right. I've got this particular cigar is a Perdomo Habano. Street value. This is probably street value. This is probably about a $13, maybe $15 cigar. It's a Churchill because of the length. They come in all different sizes. You got stubbies that are probably about yay long. Your average cigar is probably about this. They're probably about 4 inches to 5 inches. And then your Churchills are this long, which is probably about 8 inches or longer. They've got different ones that it's pointy at one end, which will be considered a torpedo. This is, to be honest, I don't know what the fuck they call it as far as the end. But the first thing you got to do, now, some guys will leave the labels on. And to me, that's to each their own. I take the label off because when I start smoking it, I don't want to have to take the label off later. So I'll just take the label off right from the word go. But you got to cut this end. Okay. Now, you can use scissors, but it will mash the end down. And so now I'm going to get sophisticated here. Got our cutters. You just kind of put the end in like yay.
Is there a certain length you have to go into? Like, you don't want to cut too far, right? You just want to cut.
No, you don't want to be like clear down to there. Hell no. There's usually like a little differentiation from the tobacco leaf that to me makes a great like cut here. Gotcha. And it's usually the last 1/8 of an inch or so, something like that. And I try to go a little bit further back because it just gives me that much more to smoke. So take your cutters. By the way, for the kids at home, you can get a pair of cutters for $2-3. They're usually not very sharp. When you cut the end that comes off, bits of tobacco go flying all over the place. Where this particular set that I got, this was like a $20 set. Now it's damn near razor sharp. If I put my finger in there and went down, I'd probably cut my finger right off. So you just kind of put it in, boom.
Nice. That was a clean cut.
Yep. And no shit all over the place. So you've got the nice clean end, the other end that's already pre-cut. And then what I kind of like to do is I'll kind of wet down the end that I'm going to hold in my mouth. Now, if you've got a good scotch, a good bourbon, a good brandy, you can dip it in that. And it actually adds to the flavor of the cigar. But since I don't have any of that right on hand, I'll just do what I do, which is put it in my mouth and kind of lick it a little bit. Now, I have a butane lighter. I'm just out of butane. And where butane doesn't work really good for pipes, butane lighters are fantastic for cigars.
Absolutely.
Okay. But I've got the cheapo Bic. So at that point, I kind of hold it over the flame just to kind of get things a little evened up. And then from there, I'll actually light it.
Nice.
And I'll roll it so that you kind of get an even burn around the whole thing. And like a pipe, if you're not kind of paying attention to it and kind of puffing on it on a regular basis, it will go out and you'll have to relight it. One thing I've learned about any cigar, you can let it go out and smoke it later. I typically do, but it affects the flavor. It's not quite as good on like if I put it out and then pick it up tomorrow, it's not going to taste as good as it does right now. So that's cigars. When I first was thinking about cigars a while back, I never understood the draw because most of the cigars I had been around were really cheap cigars, like $2, $3, and they just smelled like dog shit. Both the odor that it would put into the room and just being around it was just, ugh. And so I never understood the draw. But when my good buddy of mine introduced it to me during my mom's funeral, I understand it. It's the ritual of it.
Right.
And just like a good pipe and good pipe tobacco, a $5 cigar is going to taste and smell very different than a $20 cigar. And for the kids at home, it's worth the money to spend the $20. You'll know where the money went because it'll be smooth. It'll have a very pleasant bouquet, very pleasant odor. So this is one of those things, if you want to get into it, you don't skimp on it.
Right.
You definitely get what you pay for with a cigar. Although I have found a few on the inexpensive side that are really good. Brick House and Arturo Fuentes.
Yeah,
Nice.
I was just about to say Arturo Fuentes. I was on a fishing trip, and the guy busted those out and said, for the price you pay, it's a good bang for buck.
Yeah, the Hemingways are they're the ones I got at Gettysburg for us.
So here's my question.
Mm-hmm.
Why are certain I'm trying to think of how, because as I was chatting with some of these people that I knew who were dead set against smoking but thought smoking a pipe was cool, or cigars, they said it's just a sophisticated hobby. And I'm trying to figure out what's separate, because back in, say, the 40s, everybody smoked cigarettes. And then they did this whole campaign against cigarettes. Well, that campaign has not been, nor would it be effective against pipes or cigars.
No. Well,
I'm curious what's
smoking
causing
in Hollywood was a big thing.
Oh, say what?
Cigarette smoking in Hollywood was a big thing, and that pushed that cultural hobby, as it were. Enough. Cigars definitely more expensive.
Right.
I don't know about the pipe tobacco, the good stuff that you got. What was the cost of that?
It was $14.
Okay, it's probably, my guess is it's somewhat of an economic thing. Now, I guess you mix that with the addiction value.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Then you have that. So you've got, and now cigarettes are more expensive, but you still have that addiction factor. And I think for myself, I've been smoking cigars for about 3 years. I don't have, like, if I don't have one for months on end, I don't get a craving. So yeah. I think that may be part of it. So I think that there's a balance of the addiction value and the economic value.
I think you're right on all of them. I think you've touched on it. I think the big one of why the original popularity of cigarettes was because of advertising and the media, because all the cool actors were smoking cigarettes. It's just like back in the 90s, and you'd see some action film and there was a dude, the main actor, the main villain, had a Desert Eagle 44 and
Right.
or a Desert Eagle 50 caliber. And so now everybody on the street wants to get a 50 cal, except till you realize it's, $3 a bullet to shoot the thing. Okay. I think part of it is, I know with cigarettes, there's a lot more additives that are in cigarettes than there are with cigars and probably pipe tobacco. I also know, just like pipes with cigars, you're not inhaling it. You're just puffing on it. So I don't think, while I think there is a potential for addiction, it's much lower than cigarettes, which you're meant to inhale those. You suck it in, kind of like if you're smoking pot. You suck it in, you hold it for a few, and then you let it back out. Where I know if I did that with this cigar, I'd end up sicker than a dog.
Yeah. I think the other thing is when I don't think I've ever met a woman who smokes a pipe or was really into cigars. Cigars and pipes are still considered masculine, even though I know in previous times women did smoke pipes. I think it's because nowadays those two are seen as contemplative pastimes or hobbies. Smoking a cigarette is almost like taking a shot of heroin or to get your fix in.
Or drinking a cup of coffee.
Right, drinking a cup of coffee, as opposed to someone who takes a pipe. I can't remember. I think it was George Bruno who was describing in a video on tobacco, on pipes, that you enter this Zen, and I know exactly what he's talking about because that's why I started doing pipe smoking on top of mountains. I would sit there and beautiful, beautiful, beautiful landscape, something right out of Lord of the Rings, and I would just sit there with the pipe and be thinking about life and thinking about how beautiful the mountainscape is. I'd look over and see another mountain, say I got to climb that someday. Right, this one's down. Oh, say what?
Pipe smoking, cigar smoking is very meditative. I sort of just jumped in on the conversation.
Yeah,
it's a ritual.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where smoking a cigarette, it's drinking a cup of coffee.
You
light one up, you inhale, and especially today where cigarettes have been and are still very vilified. It's, you don't see a lot of pipe smokers or cigar smokers standing 25 feet outside a building.
Right.
There's a length of time then, because you can smoke a cigar. You got pipe, you can just keep relighting and adding the tobacco, and a cigar you could just be leisurely and be puffing on that for about an hour.
Yes.
Cigarette smokers always struck me as very frantic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not about the ritual of a cigarette. It's getting the nicotine fix.
Exactly.
It's hurry up and smoke it, because even if you don't puff on a cigarette or you're very, you're dragging on it very little, it still burns down on its own without any help from you. And I've never seen a cigarette last longer than maybe 7 or 8 minutes. And that's someone holding it and they took the first hit to light it and then they never touched it again. But you're looking about 7 minutes, where, like you say about a cigar, if I'm hitting this thing pretty hard, it's still going to take me at least 30 minutes, if not an hour, to smoke this down to the point where I'm going to burn myself.
Exactly.
So
another thing is, I believe what got cigars to be really popular was and ironically enough, we were just talking about this film before we started doing the live broadcast, is in Little Caesar. I have the actual novel that it was based off of, which was really a thinly disguised biography of Al Capone. And he did not smoke in the book. He doesn't drink either. But they changed that in the film. They gave Edward G. Robinson a cigar. And they said that I think it became a symbol of power.
Mhm.
And so people nowadays associate smoking a cigar with power and confidence.
Mhm.
And because it's, for whatever reason, it's a symbol of that. Whereas smoking a pipe is not a symbol of power. It's a symbol of one's intellectual.
Well, you look like you belong in a what do you
Dead
call it?
Poets Society.
Yeah, or what do you call a painting? Oh shit, he does the Boy Scout paintings.
Oh, Norman Rockwell.
Yeah, Norman Rockwell painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's your slippers? You get Reese to fetch your slippers.
Right. And I think that, like you were saying, people who are smoking cigarettes are doing so frantically, whereas he's smoking a cigar and we're smoking the pipe, or I'm smoking the pipe, and it causes, or it just leads to reflection. And that's the kind of thing that somebody who's, for lack of a less polite word, somebody who's smarter than other types of people reflection is something that a smart person does, or somebody who's just more
well-rounded,
they're trying
robust.
Yeah, they're trying to think about beyond. Who was it? Somebody was talking about the concept of the inner voice, where they have conversations with themselves, or they actually talk to themselves, not in a like creepy, weird, psychotic way, but just where they are examining things in life rather than just living life, right? Mm-hmm. That's another thing that I've never fully been able to understand about regular people, who they never stop to think about stuff. And so I'm always not bragging, but just when I feel like I'm pointing out the obvious in a lot of ways, and people will say, wow, that's really profound. And I think I don't consider myself to be that much smarter than, or that, I guess, as intelligent as some people would say when I make these comments. It's not that hard to understand some basic things that I see around in society. I think the thing is, people just don't stop to think about it. And so when you're smoking on your pipe, you got to be thinking about or doing something. Whereas a cigarette, people, I think, are just trying to not think at all because they're so stressed out. Now that's why they're smoking a cigarette.
Yeah, I guess the act of pipe smoking and cigar smoking would almost, force you into some kind of like contemplative self-appraisal, or like I said, the inner voice, and very meditative. That's how I am. I like to, when you're out, whether you're just sitting on your balcony or your porch, your deck, or even taking a walk.
Yeah.
Well, and where you can smoke a cigarette in 5 minutes or less, you cannot smoke a cigar in 5 minutes.
No, you have to plan to do that.
Right.
So, yeah,
well, and something Vince said too, where cigars, the association is confidence and power. I like that. What does that signify? Who is confident and who has power?
Churchill.
Yes. Who else?
Who was,
as a whole,
a masculine man.
Right.
Right. Think about the cigarette and how. Now, granted, you watch Casablanca and they're all puffing on a chimney. They're not smoking cigars, but I think it's almost also, as we've been discussing, the context and mannerism and the demeanor and their body language, where they are. How are they holding the cigarette? Are they holding it in a very frantic sort of, I'm not in control of my life. I'm not in control of my emotions. I'm just not in control. And I'm trying to find a way to remove the stress from that. As opposed to somebody who's smoking a cigar it's from a position of control. Yep. Nobody's smoking a cigar to decompress
smoking
from
a
life.
pipe or smoking a cigar is intentional.
Right.
Smoking a cigarette is automatic and unconscious. And even though cigarettes have gotten more expensive over time, the sin tax, if you will, At the same time, cigarettes are for the masses. You know, if you want to be another normie, especially today, maybe not so much during like Casablanca days and all that, but in modern times, being a cigarette smoker, you're just like everybody else. Where if you're smoking a pipe, you're eccentric. You're even, you know, to say it, and I don't mean it in a negative connotation, but you're odd. Okay. Same with cigars. Okay. Because
You're an outlier.
not everybody does it. You're an outlier because both pipes and cigars are intentional. You know, a cigarette, oh, that's a guy he's strung out on nicotine. He's got to get his fix. And he's just like everyone else. Where a guy smoking a pipe or a guy smoking a cigar, that's intentional. There's a message in it that's not just I need to get a fix.
You know what else? So we were talking about people who are well known and associated with cigars. Churchill, you got Little Caesar, you've got Gang. I think it was Al Capone actually who was the one with the cigar. That's why they gave him right. The author, I think, was trying to avoid being sued when he wrote the book. And now, what movie has an icon? What film or character is iconic with the cigarette?
Humphrey Bogart.
Right, but people don't think of Humphrey Bogart and cigarettes like as though
John Wayne.
I don't think John Wayne was smoking cigarettes in his films. I really didn't watch a whole lot of them. I guess the iconic image of someone with a cigarette is Audrey Hepburn, Breakfast at Tiffany's, where she's got the cigarette on the extended thing. Oh, and Cruella de Vil.
Oh yeah.
That kind of thing. So I think now I'm not saying that cigarette. James Bond was also a big smoker too, and but he smoked cigarettes most of the time. So it's not saying that it can't be, but again, his writer or his creator Ian Fleming was smoking 60 cigarettes a day, and that's why he died of a massive heart attack at age, in his 50s or whatever. It was pretty crazy. He told his doctor, and his doctor couldn't believe he was still alive. But that's a compulsive behavior.
Yep.
Like my grandpa, he was smoking. He was a World War II vet, and he was a smoker. And he would wake up in the morning, and he would get out of bed, and he would go have a cigarette with breakfast. That was just like you were saying, the cup of coffee thing. And then he passed out because he couldn't breathe one time, and then he said, "We're done." He quit cold turkey. And good, and which was good because he would have died. I was only 4 when he died, but I would have never met him at all if he hadn't quit, because that's, I think, what that kind of thing. But it is interesting that there's this big campaign against smoking cigarettes, and people have, I think, an older generation, because millennials are actually starting to smoke more and more cigarettes.
But if you look at it, you're seeing cigarettes back in the movies again, where for, say, the 1980s and through the 90s, almost nobody smoked unless it was they were the bad guy, or they were someone that the movie execs wanted you to hate. They wanted you, don't be like this guy. He fucking smokes. Where now you're seeing the actors are smoking again, and they're the heroes. They're the popular guy, the one that they want you to root for.
Right.
And even more importantly, they're younger now. It is the millennials smoking cigarettes. It's not the fuddy-duddy Gen Xers or the baby boomers. It is it's the crowd that, because who goes to the movie the most? Gen Z and the millennials. The Gen Xers, most of them, they got kids, they got a life, they got shit going on. Same with baby boomers. They're doing the retirement thing. They ain't got time to pay $15 to go see a movie and spend $100 getting popcorn and a drink. And so it's these kids that can't go to bars. And so this is their activity. And when they're watching whatever it is, whatever slops on the screen, here's the heartthrob and the hot chick, and they're both smoking. And there's your message that, oh, I want to be like them. I want to be popular. I want to be cool. I want to be desirable. So I need to smoke.
But notice one thing now that they do have what they include smoking in are the ratings now.
Uh-huh.
So you can have, whereas
PG-13 due to smoking.
You do. And then they have, no, this is no joke. They have, among the rating content, it's historical smoking. But that's like saying historical violence or something like that.
Historical sex. God.
What did I just walk back into?
Oh, you missed it. You're a day late and a dollar short. We were talking about the MPAA and their ratings, how back in the day, an R rating was due to adult content, whatever that was, because it's pretty vague. It was, sex, nudity, brief nudity, violence, graphic language, which usually meant they said, fuck.
I know.
But now you can get a rating that it's like a PG-13 or whatever, and it's because of smoking. Or really? as TJ was saying, historical smoking. And I was like, historical smoking. And that's where I said, oh yeah, fucking historical sex.
Historical sex.
All right.
Missionary position?
So, which is funny.
Bondage.
I'm thinking, yeah, but that also goes to show, going back to our discussion about social setting, well, the cigarette thing actually became taboo back in the 50s for the respectable crowd, the squares, as it were, because I know somebody who was in the army. He was a cigarette, obviously all smoked in the military at the time. And I think it was, he was at a church or whatever, and they pulled it out of his pocket and says, "We don't have Satan sticks here."
Oh God, Satan sticks.
Whereas I'm thinking of, but the question is, I can understand why back in the 50s they were against smoking cigarettes, because it was for that reason. It was not considered part of clean life. That was what bootleggers and guys who went to speakeasies and hung around flappers or whatever.
Scoundrels and lowlifes.
Yeah, scoundrels and lowlifes. But here's what I find so fascinating about modern cultural values. Smoking and showing smoking in a film is bad, but it's okay for Tommy to become Janie and dress up like a girl in a film. That would be totally okay. Or to have it's so bizarre that smoking a cigarette is considered taboo. Why? And they say, well, it's for health reasons. Well, okay, we eat pizza and cheeseburgers. Those are not great for your arteries. So if it's just, and what's funny is they couch it in terms of why they're against it on health grounds, but it's a moral sin almost.
It is.
We don't want to be encouraging kids.
It's narrative.
Yeah, we don't want to encourage kids to do this kind of thing. Well, and then they say, well, because you'll get cancer and all that other stuff.
But we want to encourage them to cross-dress.
Right. Well, yeah, it's kind of amazing how that sort of thing, I just think back a long time ago wasn't, I don't know. I understand the importance of physical fitness and physical health, but I think it's a substitute for genuine personal character. I was telling somebody, we were talking about, we're all bachelors, so that's the context of if we had kids. And I said, I really wouldn't care if my son became a cigarette smoker, if the alternative was, he became a socialist, or he likes soy, or he thought that he went and got some crappy bureaucratic government job or whatever. It's like I'm not saying cigarette smoking is unmasculine or not. I think that it's all a question of the context in which you're doing it. But I've seen people who, working all these blue collar jobs when I was a kid to pay for college, I was surrounded by men who were not going anywhere in life, and that's what they all did, is they all smoked cigarettes. But at the same time, there are worse things that my son could be doing. I don't see smoking cigarettes as the cause. I think that that's the key thing. I don't see smoking cigarettes as the cause of someone not a man not being the most he can be. Not to sound like the freaking army from the 90s, but becoming a masculine man. I don't see it either way. And so I just don't think of it as a big deal. Whereas when I was a kid growing up, it was being a smoker was almost like being a whatever we consider to be being a
social leper.
Yeah, you were a social leper.
That smoking does have health, risks and associations. We know that, but the difference I think you're grabbing at to a degree, at least what I'm getting from it, is we've gone from where it's smoking's bad because health, but having a boy think he's a girl or convince himself he's a girl, that's acceptable because it's not a health risk. It's not a social ill. Where smoking is not only a health risk, but at least back in like the 80s and the 90s, it was also a social ill.
Yeah.
As well, because you were a loser, you were socially shamed. I mean, even now, they still hide it under the health risk because of secondhand smoke and whatnot, which I'm actually kind of okay with it because I don't like the smell of cigarettes. I don't like being around it. Okay, I'll smoke a cigar and I'll be in a cigar lounge where you can't hardly see 10 feet in front of you because of the cloud of smoke. And, oh, well, there's your secondhand smoke. You're right. But a lot of it comes down to, and I know for me, besides the health risk, it was the social shame.
Right.
It's, if you're around a smoker or you are a smoker, you're a loser. And so it became the issue, it became a social issue. And I mean, even now, look at it. You got the laws that I know in Washington, they're very similar to Utah. They're probably almost across the board nationwide. That if you want to smoke, and granted, they're not discriminating because, we can't do that, but you have to be a minimum of 25 feet away from the door. Yeah, there is a designated area. It's outdoors. One of the jobs I go to, they have it looks like a bus stop for the smokers to go into. It's enclosed, but it is like 200 feet away from the building. And so, granted, they make it so that they're not freezing their asses off, but it's clear out in the parking lot, kind of going, here, you fucking losers. You need to be clear over here because you're a leper. Okay.
Now, excuse us while we go smoke our weed.
Right.
Yeah. We go toke up.
Yeah.
What was funny is you guys have seen Gran Torino, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So there's that great scene where Clint Eastwood is lighting up while Tao is working on the garden, and Tao goes to him and goes, smoking's not good for you. And he just looks at him and says, neither is being in a gang, dumbass.
Yep.
Okay, contextual.
Yeah, but
right?
Smoking is a social ill. Being in a gang, it's either not talked about for the most part, or for the as a peer pressure thing, being in a gang is cool. Whether it's a street gang where you're wearing a certain color or not, or it's like the background that I came from, you're wearing a back patch. You're identifying as a gang.
Well,
in a gang.
So here's the other thing that I that really riles me up. I've learned just to not care, but just the hypocrisy of people are talking about how for smoking, the same people who think smoking's bad think socialism is great. And I'm thinking, much. Yeah. So I buy these they're called Presto logs for the fireplace. They're just a cheap, very efficient way of burning. I flip it over to rip open the package, and it says, this material has been known to the state of California to cause cancer or something like that or whatever. I'm thinking this is a state that is destroying itself. Its cities are flooded with human feces on the sidewalks, and they're lecturing me about the health of a biomass that is a renewable energy source. You guys have no I think that is a definitively effeminate, non-masculine way of looking at life, where you think cigarettes are bad, but
this potentially carcinogenic log
Yeah.
Gonna kill you.
Well, that, or you think if cigarettes are bad, it's almost as though somebody says being slapped is violent, but being kicked between the legs is not, right? If you believe this is bad, then a whole lot of things fall underneath it. But it goes back to the expression, you strain the gnat, but swallow the camel, where you overlook other things. I mean, if we're talking about health, well, let's go ask the people in Venezuela how socialism is working. And I know I'm going to
starvation.
It's not real socialism, right? And I was thinking, right,
all the time. It's just,
right.
Yeah.
Not to mention.
You mean there's different flavors of socialism? I thought it was like vanilla and chocolate, that there was one flavor and that was it.
It just doesn't work. It's history has shown that.
Well, and then they get in arguments. Well, like, what about the Scandinavian countries? Well, they're not socialist either, if you actually look at it.
Nope.
And then if you, it's a different system, but at the same time, a masculine man who thinks that cigarettes are unhealthy is going to avoid other things. I think that's it. The focus on what's physically healthy as opposed to emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually healthy things to do. So if I think cigarettes are bad for my health physically, I'm also going to think of a lot of things that are unhealthy for me psychologically. And one of them is just being obsessed with, and I say this a lot with people today, is focusing on, and I talk about this in the essay, is resentment. That concept of somebody who's in a perpetual state of helplessness, and they're blaming someone for that.
Which is the French word for resentment.
Yep.
Right. And I think it was Nietzsche who was the one who
it was
really developed that. And I was reading about it, and I thought that explains a lot of what I see in people today, is when they focus on something, and that goes back to the concept of being hated as a badge of honor. When someone hates you, whether they personally or just for what you represent,
you're doing something right.
It is
that you took the words out of my mouth. That's what I was going to say, is when you rock the boat, when you piss someone off, you're doing something right.
Yep.
Right. Well, and the question is, who are you angering or earning the hatred of? As people, as I can't remember who was it who said, you can tell a man's character not just by the friends he makes, but also the enemies he makes. And if certain bad people hate them, that says something. It may not say as much about as his friends do, but if he's friends with bad people, that's not a good sign. But if the people that there's certain people that it is good for you to be hated by them because they're not good people. They're bad people. Yeah. And also I'm not talking about specific types of people or groups of people. I'm talking about certain types of people. People who are consumed by resentment. Hating you is a sign that you're doing something right.
Well, and there's been a meme that's been going around for a while, but Richard Cooper was the latest one to put it out there, that it said something along the lines of, you follow me on social media, you comment on every post I make, you say you're a hater, bitch, you're a fan.
You're a fan, absolutely.
Yeah, you're a fan. And that's how I look at it, is that haters, people that are doing better than you, don't hate you. Right. They don't have time for it. They might be, to use ressentiment or resentment, they may resent somebody who's doing way better than them.
Right.
But they don't resent the little guy. They don't hate the little guy, because all you have to think about is, would I trade places with them? Would I want their life? And I know for me, it's fuck no. So,
well,
it's
and
like,
that
okay.
explains, I think that helps explain something that I've been exploring in my own life, and just asking why, and it's gotten worse and worse and worse over the years, is just the amount of hate towards people like myself who believe certain things, who adhere to certain values, or just who we are. And it's not so much what it says. I think when someone hates you, it doesn't say as much about you as it does about what they think of you.
It actually says more about them.
Right.
Because when you look into them, You know, it's like people that write negative reviews about a book on Amazon.
Right.
Number one, they've probably never read the book. They're just jumping on the bandwagon. But
Right.
you start digging into it and you find out this person is literally a fucking loser.
Right.
They don't have shit going on. They got a worthless degree, if that. They have no life, no women, no job of any value. They contribute nothing. And
Right.
so, and they know it, and I'm sure it may not be conscious, but they know it. And when they see someone who's doing good, instead of going, maybe I need to model that person, maybe I need to ask them, how did you get there? What did you do? It's fuck them. Ooh, I hate them because honestly, I'm a piece of shit and they're not.
Right. I think that that's really what I saw in politics, because when I was in college, I had very strong political, as I always have, but I had my political views. I just didn't really focus. I've never, whenever I see a certain type of person in politics, like a specific person, I never got this visceral reaction. I just looked at them and said, I really don't like them. I don't like what they stand for. I don't like to believe. But man, other people, you bring up certain names and it's I remember one time I was in a class, not a classroom, but just a workspace area. Some person, a politician's name, I'm not going to say who, 10 years ago got dropped. And this girl from across the room just immediately stood up and just screamed, I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. And I was thinking, why are you reacting like that? And I couldn't help but ask these, or wonder, what were these people doing with their lives? Because instead of focusing on, because hate is, as Donovan brilliantly wrote, Jack Donovan, yeah. Hate is a distraction from winning, from greatness. It prevents you from getting to where you want. And people don't really seem to understand that when Genghis Khan or Attila the Hun or some famous conqueror came in, they didn't hate the people that they were wiping out.
Nope.
They, if anything, they pitied them because they were weaker than them.
Yep.
And so it helps explain what, when people say this person hates this person, or this person is whatever, and we're about love and all that. Look at their actions and the way they talk. Are they focusing on themselves, or are they focusing on someone else? And so it helps explain what's really going on. I'm trying to come up with a way to describe it other than the Voight comp test of politics, right? In Blade Runner, it was a way to tell an android from a human, whereas I almost see it as a way to tell what is actually reality. Oh, maybe more of like Inception, where you have something that helps you determine whether you're in that system, whether you're in the, what was it in Inception? Was it a virtual reality or some sort of I'm not sure, but they had these things that they would have. He had that little round top thing that he would spin around.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
And so I have these tests to determine whether what somebody says about reality, or who hates who, or who loves who, or whatever, that determines that. Because if somebody, let's say they say person A hates person B, person A never talks about person B, isn't really interested or concerned about what they're doing, doesn't even give them a thought. They're too busy doing things. Whereas person B, all they ever talk about is person A.
Yeah, they're not doing anything.
And I also think that's the way somebody who's in a genuinely aggrieved status with someone else who's been wronged, whether they hate them or not. Because a person who hates will not move on from that state, even when they have the opportunity to do so. They will be stuck in that. Whereas a person who doesn't hate will be more interested in getting themselves out of that situation. And
they get out of wanting to be a victim.
Right. They don't like being a victim. I think that's really what it comes down to. Do you like being a victim? And really what it comes down to is, are you lazy?
Yep.
Because if you're lazy,
that sums it up. Because getting out of being a victim requires work, where being a victim doesn't require anything.
No. Being a victim is it's almost like collecting. So it's a social form of collecting welfare.
It is.
It's getting
brownie points for nothing.
Yeah, you get to collect a social. It's a way to gain social status without accomplishing anything.
Social currency.
And that's what I've always found fascinating with people, where they say they are very proud of their victimhood status. Whereas, let's give an example of people who didn't hate, and they were the Japanese U.S. citizens who were put in the internment camps. They didn't talk about it because it was a shame and dishonor for them to have been treated like that, and they quickly moved on from that, right? Because there was no social status of claiming victimhood for them, and also because they moved on and didn't dwell on it. I think
wasn't it the Japanese that came up with the statement, basically, death before dishonor?
Yeah, the Japanese, the Asian cultures are very much about shame and honor, and not dishonoring yourself or dishonoring the family and all that other stuff. But the point was, I think they clearly did not hate because they moved on.
Right.
They'd been the government wronged them, and in an atrocious way, the way that they basically forced them to sell all their stuff and move to these camps without doing anything wrong. And they just came back and said, we're going to move on with that. Whereas a group, they could have done completely differently. They could have said, we're going to make this our identity for the rest of our lives. And for our
feminists.
Yeah. And I think that's the point, is even if I was the victim of something, why would I want that to be my identity? That's something that you're ashamed of, and you move on from that. And I think that's how societies in previous times dealt with being victims of stuff. You just moved on because you understood the futility and the harm of victimhood.
Well, there has to be a payoff, whether that's monetarily or
right. Well, now.
Well, and it goes back to, we live in a feminine society. Guys can get in a fight over whatever, whether it's with another man or a woman. We have it out, whether verbally or physically, and then for a guy, we're done. It's in the past. Not for women. Women hold on to that shit for 30 fucking years, and they bring it up every chance they can. And they usually do it when you're not ready. You're not expecting it. All of a sudden, well, do you remember you did this in 1996? And you're like, bitch, I thought we were fucking done with that. Okay, I think and that's the kind of the feminine psyche as a whole. And that's what our society is. And women as a whole, not all women, obviously.
A lot of guys do that.
As a general, more often than not, women like to play the victim. And that's what our society has devolved to.
And men do that, but they do it within the context of there's no shame for it. Whereas that in a traditional male society, you would not do that because men would just look at you as weak. And
you're a woman. You're a pussy. What the fuck's wrong with you? Get over it.
Right. They would. It's a loss of social status to be a victim. And I think that
guys don't hold grudges.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I don't know what you would call it, but talking to some Southerners about the Civil War, some of them,
well, and
they still not be over it. But I think it's because for them, and maybe I never thought about it until just now, because I never grew up in that culture environment. My ancestors didn't fight on that side of the war, but they're the only part of America that have actually surrendered in a war. And so how do you move on from that? Because they are with the country now because they lost. So their identity in that sense, how do you deal with that? I've never thought about it, and I don't have an answer to it, but it just made me think, in a traditional masculine society, when you've lost a fight, what do you do to move on from that and not make that part of your identity? And I think that's why some of these, I don't know if I've told this story before, but I had a relative who was in England, and he ran into an older English gentleman, and it was right around the D-Day anniversary. And so my family member of mine was talking about how they wanted to go be in England for or in Normandy, in that area, for the the Normandy invasion anniversary, and the Englishman looked at him like he was insane and said, "Why would you want to celebrate that?" Well, it turns out he thought he was talking about the 1066 invasion by William the Conqueror from Normandy into England, and no joke, there are some people who still have not gotten over that.
Wow.
There's still, I want to say,
fucking almost 2,000 years later. Jesus.
Right.
Or 1,000
right.
years
And
later.
I think that is actually the sign of a culture that's going to succeed in their narrative is what is the narrative of your group? Is it a positive or is it negative? Is it we were wronged? Like with feminism, it's perpetually, we are in a perpetual state of victimhood and aggrieved status, and someone's oppressing us.
They keep moving the goalpost.
Right, and we got to go to find the 17-year, there's a 17-year-old boy on the cover of a magazine, and he's oppressing us, right? You see that kind of stuff, you realize that these people, and then and this is really what it comes down for me, knowing all this stuff, I pity them. Because how pathetic do you have to be to look at somebody who clearly, if you are rational and sane, understand that they have no control over their own lives?
Well, that's the thing. If you're busy doing shit, and not for nothing, getting laid, if you're busy doing shit and that, you don't have time to sit in front of your keyboard or be running around with a pink pussy hat over nothing. It's ridiculous to me.
And that's actually the problem I've had with so many groups that I've tried to either get involved with or identified with, and including with the whole, I'm not sure what you would call it anymore, the manosphere, I guess what's left of it or the remnants of it. But you do get those men who are like that, who are in a perpetual state of victimhood, and they're always complaining about how feminist.
The MRA itself.
The
men's right movement, the MRM, they're the other side of the feminist coin. Now they have their own aggrieved status.
That's not helpful either.
Now the thing is, if you're a dad who your kids got taken away from you, and you've genuinely been given the short end of the stick on life, and that I understand the anger, but what do you do with it? Do you say, I'm going to do the best I can with my circumstances, or are you going to make the fact that your wife walked out on you and took everything, took you to the cleaners? Are you going to make that who you are as a person? And it's the same thing with,
you're not going to die. You don't want to die on that hill.
Right. It's the same thing with libertarianism. I've been involved with libertarian circles for a while. And one of the things that really have made me want to stop discussing stuff with people is that it attracts people who have a grievance against the government. And that's their identity. And that's not, I'm too busy doing other stuff to be sitting there hyper-focusing on every single injustice by the government, because
you're living your life.
Well, and again, I think it would be interesting if I brought this up with libertarians, saying your hatred of government is a badge of honor. You do them honor because you're acknowledging their superiority over you.
Kind of like anti-Semites. How much power that, people that hate the Jews, the Jews run everything and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, you've got this whirlwind of hate, but you're giving them so much power because why don't you just get on with your life?
That's the
thing. Cares?
Well, and that's the thing I would say about all these people who talk about the conspiracies of how certain peoples are running the world or whatever. And I actually said to somebody who was describing all this stuff, I said, if they're capable of doing that, more power to them. I wish I want to be like that. I want to have it. And it's the same thing people say. I was having not even a debate. I was just listening to someone talk about how I myself am part of this oppressive system without even knowing it. And I go, I kind of take that as a compliment, because that just, like you're saying that just without doing anything, I am exercising power over you.
You're a god
against your will.
Yeah.
Even talking about God, even God does not, he's actively controlling stuff. He's not just like, it's not like he's performing miracles without his knowledge, or he's, causing all this other stuff to happen. So this is where I just find it so funny that people genuinely believe that, and they don't realize that they are honoring that person by saying, I think this is how powerful and great you are.
Yeah, they're giving you their power.
Because as Dan
which I say, thank you.
Well, no, that's my go-to response now when someone says that you need to check your masculine privilege, or you got, not that this is said anymore because I just avoid those kind of discussions, but if people were to say that, I would say your hatred of me is a badge of honor, or you do me great honor by hating me.
Thank you for your power.
Yeah, thank you for your hatred of me. I'm deeply honored, or something that's really a good quip. Because
thank you for elevating me to God status.
It's like,
and on that note,
yeah.
It is. We've run over the 2-hour mark.
Nice.
Yes, which time seems to fly when we have these discussions.
Oh yeah,
right.
It's a good time.
Yeah. I don't want to cut you off, but I'm going to have to. So we will continue. We'll definitely add this into the rotation, the discussion to remember this. So once again, this has been Masculine Geek number 6. Thank you for joining us, the listeners that were here and the future listeners. Starting with Rob, do you want to go ahead and plug anything new that you're doing, or go ahead and give the information for you?
Okay. Well, all I'm really doing right now is the same thing I've been doing. I've been writing my posts, doing my videos, doing my audio from it. You can find me at robsays.net. That's ROBSAYS.net. Go to the contact page. You'll find my links to my YouTube, my Anchor FM podcast, all of that. It's all consolidated there. That's probably the first place to start. You'll find my Twitter handle, all that stuff there.
Excellent. TJ?
All right. You can reach me at tjmartinell.com. I also have a weekly podcast, Mountain Pass Podcast. It's at soundcloud.com/TJMartinell. And you can get my books on Amazon. The links to them will be on my website.
Excellent. VinceLaRosa.com, MasculineGeek.com. We have a SoundCloud, Masculine Geek on SoundCloud now. It's got all our posts there in MP3 audio format. And join us every Wednesday, same time, 9 p.m. Eastern. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.
See you guys around.